In this video we're going to discuss what the React Context API is, where it's useful. We're also going to go through an example where we can switch between dark mode and light mode within an application. We're also going to show you how to create multiple contexts within an application, and we'll discuss how you can prevent some of the potential issues with using context, such as having unnecessary re-renders of components. And we'll also discuss the differences between the Context API and Redux for state management and where each of these different solutions is appropriate. So typically in React, data is passed down from a parent component to a child component via props. But this can lead to an issue called prop drilling, where we have to pass down props through lots of components to get them where they are needed. And also some props, such as the current authenticated user or the UI theme, such as whether we are on dark mode or light mode. And these props are often required by many components within an application. And the Context API provides a way to share values like these between components without having to explicitly pass them down as a prop through every level of a tree. So Context is designed to share data that can be considered global for a tree of React components. So let's now go through a quick example showing you how you can use the Context API to toggle between light mode and dark mode within an application. So I've got a basic Create React app application here, and I've just cleared out the app.js file and made a couple of simple components. So I've created a components folder within the source file, and I've created a very simple button. So we can see here this is a button which has a children prop, which basically just renders the text within the button. So you can see here we have the button, and this is basically the children of this button, which says toggle theme, which we can see here. And we've also got some basic styling, so we have a background color of black and a text color of white. And this button is actually going to be used to toggle the theme between light mode and dark mode. So currently this is light mode because everything's kind of got a light background and sort of dark text. And then we have a navbar which has a couple of links, so home and about, and we also have a background color of white and a text color of black for this. So what we're now going to do is we're actually going to create a context first of all for the different themes within our application. So we're going to create a folder called contexts, and this is where we would store all of our contexts. So first of all we want a theme context, and in here what we're going to do is we're going to create our themes. So I'm going to say export const themes equals a JavaScript object, and this is going to contain two objects. Okay, the first object is going to be our light theme, and the second object is going to be our dark theme. Okay, so in here what we need to do is we need to specify the background color for light theme, so we're just going to say white, and we need to specify a text color, so let's call this text, and this is going to be black. Okay, and then let's actually copy and paste these into our dark theme. So the background is going to be black for our dark theme and the text is going to be white. Okay, so that is our theme, or our two themes for light mode and dark mode. We now need to create our theme context. So we can say export const, and we're going to call this theme context, and this is going to be equal to React dot create context, and then we pass in a sort of default value. Okay, so that's going to be light mode. Okay, so our default value is going to be light mode, and we also need to import React here, so let's do that quickly. Import React from React. Okay, so that is our theme context. We call create context, which comes from React, and we pass in a default value, and our default value is going to be the light theme. Okay, so next up we can actually come into our app.js file, and we actually need to wrap all of the components that need access to the theme and we can wrap these in a context provider. So all of the components that need access to the current theme are navbar and button. So we need to wrap these in a context provider. So what we need to do is we need to actually import our theme context that we've just created, which is here. We need to import this into app.js. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to auto import it. So theme context, and we actually need to wrap all of the components that need this theme context, and from this we can access a provider. So this is a theme context provider. So this is providing our theme to all of the components nested inside of this theme context provider. Okay, so next up we actually need to create a couple of, well, we need to create one state variable for the theme. So what we can do is we can say const theme and set theme is equal to use state, and in here we can pass the theme that we want to initially use, which is the light theme. So we actually need to import our themes, and in here we can pass themes dot light. Okay, so now what we can do is we can actually pass this theme to our theme context provider, because this has a value prop and we can pass the theme. So now what we've actually done is we've made this theme state variable available to all of these nested components. So we can access these now within these components without actually having passed it as a prop. So we've not passed it as a prop to any of these components, but we can still access theme within these components. So let's actually show you now how you can access this theme state within these components. So if we go into button now, what we can do is we can actually use a hook that comes from React called use context. And this allows us to actually use a certain type of context. So what we're going to do is we're going to say const theme is equal to use context, and now we pass the context that we actually want to use. So the context that we want to use is the theme context. Okay, so now we can actually access the theme. We've got access to this theme without having to actually pass it as a prop down to this button component. So now what we can do is we can say theme dot background, and in here we can say theme.text. Okay, and then we can come into our navbar and we can do the same thing. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. So we can say we can access the theme by using this use context hook, which comes from React, and we just need to import it, use context, and we also need to import our theme context, the context that we are actually using. And now again we can access all of the properties on the theme object. So we can say theme.background and theme.text, and actually we don't need that there, we just need to provide theme.text to the links. Okay, so there we go. So now we have our navbar and our button both getting or accessing the sort of color properties from this theme object, which is made available via this context provider. Okay, so just to summarize what we've got here, we have a theme context provider, and we pass an initial value to this context, and that comes from here. So we have a state of theme, and we pass a light theme by default, and that is then made available within these nested components via the use context React hook. Okay, so let's actually now create a method that we can use to actually toggle the theme. So in app.js I'm going to create a method called a callback function this is going to be, and this is going to be equal to let's see, what do we need here? So we're going to call set theme, and we're going to toggle the theme. So we can access the current state within this set theme function. And what we can do in here is we can check what the current state is equal to. So if the current state is light mode, so if we are currently in light mode, then we need to switch to dark mode. So we can say themes.dark mode, and otherwise we need to switch to light mode. Okay, so here what we're doing is we're checking the current state. If the current state is light mode, then we are going to return the dark mode. If the current state is dark mode, then this is going to be false, and therefore we're going to return light mode. So it's just switching between the two states every time we call this toggle theme function. So what we need to do is we actually need to pass this toggle theme function to the button. So I'm going to create a prop called change theme on button, and we'll create that in a second. But for now, let's just pass it down. So let's now go on to button and actually create a prop here called change theme. And then what we can do is on click, we can actually call this change theme callback function. Okay, so let's actually test this out, and you can see that we are now toggling between the different themes, or different between light mode and dark mode, exactly as we wanted. So let me also now show you how we could actually make this toggle theme function available all throughout our application. So let's say that there was another component somewhere deep down in our application, in our sort of component tree, that also needed to be able to change the current theme of the application. So we can actually make this toggle theme method available via the theme context. So what we can actually do is, rather than just passing the theme, we can pass an object which contains the theme and this toggle theme callback function, and then we can remove this prop from button like so, and then within button we can remove change theme, and then we can actually access theme and toggle theme from the theme context whenever we use the context. So then on click we can call toggle theme, and that should be okay. And then we also need to update navbar now, because theme is now accessed. We can destructure theme from the object returned here. So let's test that out, see if it works, and that is all working perfectly. Okay, perfect. So there we go. We've used the context API to share the theme state throughout all of the components nested in this theme context provider, without having to pass the theme or the toggle theme function down as props. So I'm now going to show you how you can create multiple React contexts. So it's also possible to create multiple contexts and wrap our application in multiple providers. So currently we only have one provider, which is the theme context, but we're now going to create a user context, which is going to basically make the current logged in user available to all of the nested components. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a user context in our contexts folder. So currently we just have theme context. We're now going to create a user context, and in here what we want to do is we want to store the current logged in user's data. So we can say const user data equals, and we're just going to make a object with a username, and we'll say Danny, and we'll say age 28. Okay, so now, just as we did in our theme context, we can now create a context, a user context. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll call this user context and set this equal to react.createContext, and we can pass a sort of default backup value of this user data. And I think this time, rather than actually importing React, we'll just import the createContext function from React, and then we can get rid of that. Okay, so in an actual real application, we'd probably be getting this user data from our sort of back-end API, and this would be, we'd make a sort of Axios or Ajax request to get this user data, but for now we're just going to hard code it in to keep things nice and simple. And what we can do now is we can come into our app.js file and we can wrap our components, so our navbar, in a user context provider. Now, what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to show you that you can sort of wrap different components in different contexts. So our user context, the navbar needs to know about the current logged in user because we want to display the current logged in user's username on the top of the navbar. But the button does not need to know about the current logged in user. That's just a button that toggles the theme. So what you could do is just wrap the components that need the current user and not the other ones. So we're just going to wrap the navbar. So we can say user context dot provider, and we're just going to wrap this navbar component. Okay, so we now need to provide a value or a set of values that need to be made available globally to the tree of components that this user context is wrapping. So we're going to create a state for the current logged in user. So we're just going to say user and set user, and we're going to give this a default value or an initial value of the user data that we hard coded in our user context file. So let's actually import the user data and pass that to our useState hook. User data, and we can then pass this to our user data provider, and now this user data is going to be, or this user state variable is going to be made available to all of the wrap components, which is currently just the navbar. So now if we go into our navbar component, we can then use the user context just as we did before. So we can say const user equals use context, and we can pass the context that we want to use, which is the user context. Okay, so now what we can do is we should be able to access our current logged in user. So if we come down here and just put a little span tag, and let's log out the current logged in user's username, and there we go. We can see that Danny, the current logged in user's username, is now in the navigation bar. Okay, so if I just want to discuss now why it's a good idea to split up contexts like we have here, because you might be thinking, why can't we just have one context and wrap everything in one context? So why can't we have like one big context that has the theme and the current logged in user and all the other stuff and just wrap everything in there? And the reason we split up our context like this is because if we stored theme and user in one big context, then any components that only need to know about the user, for example, would have to re-render every time the theme changed. So let's say that navbar, well, let's say that button was also wrapped in this user context, and then the user changed, then the button would actually also have to re-render, even though it requires no knowledge of this user context. So by wrapping only the components that need to know about certain contexts, we can prevent unnecessary re-renders and improve the performance of our application, which is not so important in smaller applications, but as your application grows with lots of components in a sort of complex tree, then it can make quite a big difference. So in summary, by only storing related data in each context, we help to prevent unnecessary re-renders of components. So I'm now going to show you how you can prevent re-renders with context. So whenever a context value is updated, all components consuming that context will be re-rendered, even if they are wrapped in React.memo. And this can worsen an app's performance. So I'm going to show you a few ways that we can mitigate this problem. So I've already shown you that by wrapping by using multiple contexts It can help to prevent re-renders because, for example, if we stored username and theme in one big context, then every time the theme state is changed, all components consuming just the username would also have to be re-rendered. And this can be solved by having a user context containing just the username or user data, and a theme context that contains the preferred theme. And now when the theme is changed, only components consuming theme context will be re-rendered. And this is actually the preferred way of solving the re-render problem within the sort of React community. And another way that we can prevent re-renders is by having one component with react.useMemo inside of it. So that is this example. So here I've created a simple example. So this is a card component with a h2 and a paragraph, and both of these components depend on the current theme. So the CSS is going to be changed depending on the current theme. So with this, you can see here we have one big context, and this contains both user data and themes. So if for whatever reason we couldn't actually split up our context into multiple smaller contexts and we have to have one big one, this is how we could solve the re-render issue. So here we can see that theme is a dependency of useMemo. So the first argument of useMemo, which is a React hook, is a callback function, and here we are returning the sort of JSX that this card component is made from. And then the second argument is a sort of dependency array, and what we're saying here is only re-render this JSX if the theme changes. Okay, if anything else changes, we don't need to re-render this or these components. We can memoize them. Okay, so we're only going to get a re-render of these components returned by the callback function when theme is changed. Okay, so this is one way that we can prevent re-renders if we have one large context containing multiple different types of data and we're unable to split these up into smaller contexts for whatever reason. Okay, so we can see here that from the app context we're just getting the value that we need, and we can pass it to the dependency array of useMemo. Another thing that we can do is that we can split the component up into smaller components. So you can see here we've split up our card into a couple of more smaller components. So we have card title and we have card description, and what we can do is we can pass down as a prop the needed value from context with the child components wrapped in react.memo. Okay, so now when card title and card title and card description will only be re-rendered if theme is updated, but not if the username is updated. And again, this is a useful method if we can't split up our context. So we can see here we get the theme, the value that we need from the context, and we pass it down as a prop to these child components, and we wrap these child components in react.memo. And what react.memo does is it prevents re-renders. If it only re-renders the component if the prop, one of its props, changes. So it's only going to be re-rendered if theme changes, but not if, say, the user data changes. Okay, whereas if we didn't wrap it in memo, then if user data changed, it would cause a re-render of card, which would cause a re-render of its child components. But because we've wrapped it in memo, and it will only be re-rendered if theme changes. So we're now going to take a look at the differences between the React Context API versus Redux for state management throughout an application. So the React Context API, as we've seen, comes sort of baked in or included with React, whereas Redux is a third-party package which needs to be installed. And this sort of React Context versus Redux is a very common question with beginner and intermediate React developers, and generally Redux is only necessary in sort of more larger applications with large amounts of state or large amounts of complex state. So the Redux maintainer, Mark Erickson, gives the following reasons for why you would actually want to use Redux in your application. So it provides a consistent architectural pattern in your application, which is very useful if you have multiple developers working in a team, because it sort of encourages the same way of managing state between different developers. So each developer isn't going to have like their own way of sort of managing state, and it's going to make the app more consistent. It provides debugging capabilities. It can provide middleware, lots of add-ons and extensibility, cross-platform and cross-framework usage, so you can use it in different front-end frameworks. And also I think there's a mobile version for React Native, I believe. And also, depending on your app setup, it can provide much better performance than working with just the context API. And we don't have to worry about the re-render problem that I showed you earlier that we get with context. As I mentioned earlier, components only re-render when the value that they are using updates, and that's with Redux. So it can offer some nice performance benefits, especially if you have a large tree of components. But the issue with Redux is that it does add quite a bit more boilerplate to your application, and it also can take a while to set up as well than just using React's built-in context API. So for smaller to medium-sized apps, or apps that don't have that much state or don't have very complex state, the context API will often be a good solution. So that's just about everything that I wanted to cover. Thank you for watching the video. Please give the video a like, and for more from me you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I will see you in the next one.